She hadn't slept for 3 years, not a full night. Not once. Every nanny walked in with confidence and walked out in tears. They said the little girl screamed through the night like something inside her was broken. Her father, a billionaire, built walls of glass and silence. Her mother was gone, and the child's loneliness echoed through every room. Until one night, a new voice entered that house. A lullaby so gentle, it stopped the storm. That moment would change everything. Before the sleepless nights, before the world called her the billionaire's problem child, there was a girl named Sophie Grant, 5 years old. Bright eyes, fragile heart. Her father, Richard Grant, built empires from glass and code, a man who could buy anything except peace. Her mother, Laura, was the light that filled their home. She painted, she sang, she turned every corner of that mansion into laughter. Until one cold winter morning, she didn't wake up. After that, silence moved in. The piano stayed shut, the curtains stayed closed, and Sophie stopped speaking. Richard buried himself in work. He told himself he was doing it for her. He built companies, signed deals, filled his days so he wouldn't feel his nights. And when Sophie cried, he hired people to help her. The best nannies, therapists, doctors, they all came with promises and soft voices, but one by one, they failed. Some lasted a week, some only a day. By the time the 99th nanny left, the mansion was a graveyard of toys and broken hope. Richard tried everything: white noise machines, sleep consultants. He even stayed outside her room some nights, listening to her sob through the walls, whispering apologies she would never hear. He didn't know how to reach her, and she didn't know how to let him in. Outside, the media loved the story, the billionaire with the haunted child. But inside that mansion was just a father and a daughter, both drowning in silence. Across the city, another story was unfolding. A small apartment, a flickering light, a girl named Maya Lopez sitting by a hospital bed, holding her mother's hand. Maya was she worked long hours at a diner, then cleaned offices at night. Her pay barely covered the rent, but she never complained. Her mother always said, "You have a gift, Mia. When you sing, people feel safe." But Maya didn't sing much anymore, not since her mother got sick. Life had become a list of payments, shifts, and prayers. One morning, she noticed a job ad on her phone. Full-time nanny, discreet, high pay, no name, no address, just an email. She hesitated. It looked too good to be true. But when your mother's medicine costs more than your rent, you learn to hope in strange places. So she sent a message. The next day, a black car stopped outside her building. A man in a grey suit handed her an envelope. Inside, one line: interview at 5 p.m., Grant residence. Maya had never been near that part of the city. The streets were wide, the houses too quiet. Everything looked clean, expensive, and cold. She felt out of place before she even rang the bell. A woman from the staff led her into a bright, perfect room filled with untouched toys, and there, sitting in the corner, was Sophie, small, pale eyes like rain that never stopped. She held a worn-out stuffed rabbit and didn't look up. Maya didn't say much. She just sat down on the floor, not too close, not too far. And after a moment, she whispered, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. I understand quiet." Sophie didn't respond, but she stopped rocking, just for a second. From the doorway, Richard watched. He had seen so many interviews, women with polished words and perfect smiles. They all left, they all failed. But something in this girl's voice felt different. It wasn't soft in a practiced way. It was gentle in a human way. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he decided to give her a chance. That day, Maya Lopez became the 100th nanny, the one everyone believed would quit before the week was over. But fate had other plans. Maya Lopez had never planned to be a nanny. She wanted to be a singer once. Not famous, not rich, just someone who could make people feel something when she sang. But life doesn't always care about dreams. Sometimes it just hands you bills, responsibilities, and heartbreak. Her mother had raised her alone, a strong woman with tired eyes and a laugh that made neighbors smile. But sickness had stolen that laugh, one hospital visit at a time. Maya worked wherever she could. Diner shifts in the morning, cleaning offices at night. She lived on coffee, cheap takeout, and hope. Still, she kept a kind of quiet light in her eyes, the kind that comes from people who've learned how to survive without bitterness. She didn't wear fancy clothes or carry an expensive phone, but she carried patience, and that was worth more than anyone knew. When she entered the Grant mansion, everything felt unreal. Marble floors, high ceilings, walls that seemed to whisper how rich people lived. The staff moved quietly, afraid to disturb the silence. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum. Richard Grant was polite but distant. He explained the rules quickly, schedules, routines, responsibilities. He didn't make eye contact for long. His voice sounded tired, as if he had said these words too many times before. Maya listened, nodded, said thank you. Then she met Sophie again, the little girl she'd seen in the corner during her interview. The child sat by the window, looking outside like she was waiting for someone who would never come back. Sophie didn't speak. She didn't cry either. She just existed. That kind of silence is heavier than noise. It tells you there's pain too deep to explain. Maya didn't push. She didn't fill the space with questions or forced smiles. Instead, she stayed close enough to be seen, far enough to give Sophie air. Her first night was quiet. She made soup for dinner. Sophie didn't eat much, but she didn't push the bowl away either. That was something. Later, Maya found herself sitting outside the child's room, listening to soft crying through the door. She wanted to go in, but something told her not yet. Some wounds need to feel your patience before they feel your presence. As days passed, Maya learned the rhythm of the house. Everything ran on schedule. Breakfast at 8, lessons at 10, therapy at 2. The staff moved like shadows, doing their jobs without emotion. Richard came and went like a ghost. He worked late, left early, and spoke mostly through his assistant. But one evening, Maya saw him standing by Sophie's door. He looked lost, almost afraid to enter. She said softly, "She's asleep now." He nodded, then whispered, "She never sleeps through the night." There was something fragile in his voice. Not power, not control, just pain. Maya didn't answer. She just said, "Maybe tonight will be different." When he walked away, she looked at the closed door and whispered, "You both need rest." For the first time in months, Sophie didn't scream that night. She stirred, whimpered, then went quiet again. Maya stayed outside her room until dawn, just in case. By the third day, small changes began to show. Sophie followed Maya with her eyes when she moved around the room. She didn't smile, but she watched. Maya told her stories while folding laundry, simple stories about the city, about her mother, about the stars that no one could own. She didn't expect a response. She just wanted Sophie to hear a voice that didn't demand anything. Richard noticed the difference. He saw Sophie calmer, quieter. One morning, he asked Maya how she did it. She said, "I don't do much. I just let her be." He looked at her, confused. Everyone else had tried to fix Sophie, but Maya wasn't trying to fix her. She was trying to understand her. In the evenings, when the house grew cold and the city lights shimmered outside, Maya would hum softly as she cleaned up toys. Just random melodies, half-remembered songs from her childhood. She didn't know that Sophie was listening from her bed. And every night, that little girl's breathing slowed a bit sooner. Richard started coming home earlier. At first, just to check in. Then, without realizing, to listen to. There was something about that humming, something that felt like home. Maya didn't know she was being watched. She was just doing what she always did, showing kindness the only way she knew how. Through patience, through small gestures, through presence. She still worried about money, about her mother, about what would happen if she lost this job. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was doing something that mattered, not just for survival, for someone else's healing. And somewhere deep inside that mansion, a tiny spark of life began to return. In Sophie's eyes, in the quiet halls, even in the heart of a man who had forgotten what warmth felt like. But no one knew that the real change, the miracle, was still waiting to be heard. It happened one night, almost by accident. The kind of moment no one plans, the kind that just happens, quietly, and changes everything. Sophie had been restless again. For days, her sleep came in broken pieces. Every time Maya thought she'd settled, the little girl woke up crying, calling for someone who wasn't there. Maya had tried everything, warm milk, soft music, even sitting by her bed till her eyes closed. Nothing worked. That night, the rain was heavy. The wind howled against the windows, and thunder rolled over the city. The whole house felt tense. Richard was working late again. The staff had gone home early. It was just Maya and Sophie in that big, empty mansion. Sophie sat on the floor, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Tears streaked her face. Maya sat beside her quietly, unsure what else to do. She could feel the child shaking, the fear that words couldn't reach. She whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here." But Sophie didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window, where lightning flashed across the sky. And then, out of nowhere, Maya did something she hadn't done in a long time. She began to hum. It wasn't a song she planned. It just slipped out, a lullaby her mother used to sing when Maya was scared of storms. The melody was soft, slow, full of warmth. And as she sang, the air in the room began to change. Sophie's breathing slowed. Her body stopped trembling. The tears on her cheeks dried. She turned, slowly, her eyes wide with wonder, like she was seeing something she didn't know she'd been missing. Maya kept singing, her voice steady and real. No fancy words, no performance, just a song about stars finding their way home. And for the first time in 3 years, Sophie's eyelids grew heavy. Her tiny hand reached out, clutching Maya's sleeve, and she fell asleep. Maya sat there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid the moment might vanish if she did. The thunder faded, the house went quiet, and a strange peace filled the room. When she finally stepped out into the hallway, Richard was standing there. He had just come home. He had seen the whole thing from the doorway, the singing, the calm, the miracle he'd been begging for. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at Maya, almost disbelieving. Then he said softly, "She's asleep." Maya nodded. "Yes." Finally, he took a step closer. "What did you do?" "I sang," she said. "That's all." He looked at her, confused and moved at the same time. "Do you realize she hasn't slept through the night since her mother?" Maya lowered her eyes. "I didn't know that. I just sang what my mom used to sing when I was scared." Richard tried to respond, but his voice caught. He hadn't heard a lullaby in that house since Laura died. He hadn't heard warmth in years. He should have walked away, gone back to his work, kept his distance. But he didn't. Instead, he walked into his daughter's room, stood by her bed, and watched her sleep. The sight hit him harder than any deal or loss ever had. He whispered, "Thank you." Maya shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. She just needed to feel safe." That night, Richard didn't go back to work. He stayed there, by Sophie's bedside, watching her chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. And in that stillness, something inside him cracked open, something he didn't even know was still alive. The next morning, the house felt different. The sunlight came through the curtains. Sophie woke up quietly and ate breakfast without tears. Even the staff noticed the change, though no one dared to mention it out loud. Later that day, Richard found Maya in the kitchen, packing Sophie's lunch. He said, "Whatever you did last night, keep doing it." She smiled. "It wasn't a trick, Mr. Grant. It was just a song." He studied her face for a moment. He saw kindness there, the kind that doesn't need permission or reward. And for the first time, he wondered about her story, where she came from, why her voice carried so much peace. He didn't ask, not yet. He just said, "Thank you again," and walked away. But that night, when the house was quiet, Richard stood outside Sophie's room again. Maya's lullaby drifted through the air, gentle, steady, full of something that had been missing for far too long. He closed his eyes and listened, and in that moment, he realized the truth. Money couldn't buy peace. Luxury couldn't heal grief. But kindness, the kind that expects nothing in return, could begin to stitch what was broken. That song, sung by a girl who had nothing, brought life back into a home that had everything. And from that night on, the sleepless mansion began to dream again. After that night, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like the slow return of color after a long winter. Sophie started to sleep. Not every night, not perfectly, but enough. She woke up calmer. She ate better. She smiled once, small, barely there, but real. And when Maya saw it, she almost cried. Each day, Maya built tiny routines around her. Morning sunlight in the playroom, story time after lunch, short walks in the garden before bedtime. Nothing forced, just gentle moments. Moments that let Sophie feel safe enough to breathe. Sometimes Sophie followed her around the house, still silent, still watchful. Sometimes she sat near her, tracing shapes in the air with her small fingers. And sometimes she would hum along softly to Maya's songs. It wasn't just about sleep anymore. It was about trust. Something deep, fragile, slowly growing between them. Richard noticed everything. The house felt lighter now. Even the staff whispered less. He found himself coming home earlier, staying longer, watching the two of them from a distance. One afternoon, he caught Sophie sitting at the piano with Maya beside her. Maya was teaching her how to press the keys gently, one at a time. Each sound came out hesitant, but full of wonder. Richard hadn't heard that piano since Laura was alive. He stood at the door, afraid to interrupt. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know she remembered that piano." Maya smiled. "She doesn't remember it. She's discovering it." He nodded. "That's something Laura used to say." She looked at him. Was she the one who sang to her? He hesitated. Every night, silence hung between them. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that understands. Days turned into weeks. Maya's presence began to change more than Sophie's world. It began to touch Richard's too. He started to notice small things again. The warmth in sunlight, the laughter of a child, the taste of home-cooked food, things he hadn't felt in years. He watched how Maya spoke to Sophie, how she listened more than she talked, how her patience could soften even the hardest moments. One evening, while Sophie played in the living room, Richard joined Maya in the kitchen. He said, "You seem to understand her better than anyone else." Maya replied, "She doesn't need understanding. She just needs to be felt." He looked at her, curious. "Felt?" Maya nodded. "You can't fix sadness with words. You have to sit with it until it trusts you." That line stayed with him long after she left the room. As the weeks passed, the three of them began to form something that looked almost like a family, though none of them dared call it that. They had dinners together. They laughed, quietly, at Sophie's new words. They shared silence that wasn't painful anymore. One evening, while Maya tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl whispered her first full sentence in months. "Will you sing again?" Maya smiled and nodded. She sang that same lullaby, the one that had opened the door to healing. Sophie fell asleep halfway through. Richard stood in the hallway listening. When Maya came out, he said, "You have everything money can't buy." She looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Peace," he said. "You bring peace." She smiled gently. "You already had it. You just forgot what it sounds like." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He sat by his desk, looking through old photos of Laura and Sophie. He realized he hadn't heard laughter in that house since Laura's funeral until Maya arrived. Her presence had reminded him that grief doesn't disappear. It just needs a softer place to live. The next morning, he found Maya in the garden with Sophie, showing her how to water plants. The child giggled as the hose sprayed her shoes. He stood there, smiling for the first time in years. Later, over coffee, he said quietly, "You've done more for her in a month than anyone has in 3 years." Maya shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just treated her like she matters." He replied, almost to himself, "I forgot how to do that." For a moment, they both went quiet. Then Maya said softly, "You haven't forgotten. You just stopped believing you could." The way she said it, calm, without judgment, stayed with him. It wasn't advice, it was truth. And truth has a way of healing what pride cannot. That night, when Maya sang again, Richard stayed outside Sophie's room with his eyes closed. He realized he wasn't just listening to a lullaby. He was listening to forgiveness, slow, quiet, human, and for the first time, he didn't feel alone in his own home. Every story that heals also tests. Peace doesn't arrive to stay forever. It arrives to see if you're ready to keep it. The calm in the Grant mansion didn't go unnoticed. The staff whispered about the change. The neighbors wondered how the sleepless child had finally found rest. And soon, the story reached the press again. A journalist called it the 100th nanny miracle. Someone had leaked the name. The internet picked it up. Pictures of Maya walking with Sophie outside the gates began to spread. At first, Maya ignored it. She had no interest in fame. But then, reporters started camping near the driveway. They shouted questions as she carried Sophie to the car for her appointments. "Are you the one who finally cured her? What's your secret?" She stayed silent, shielding the child's face with her arms. But silence isn't protection in a world that feeds on stories. One afternoon, Richard came home earlier than usual. Maya stood by the kitchen window, scrolling through her phone. Her face was pale. He asked, "What's wrong?" She handed him the screen. It was an article from Waitress to Nanny. The poor girl who saved the billionaire's daughter. They had found her name, her address, even her mother's condition. Richard's face hardened. "I'll have the PR team handle it." But Maya shook her head. "You can't control what people write." "I can try," he said. "And when they move on to the next story?" She asked, "What happens to Sophie then?" He didn't answer. The next day, the house filled with photographers. Cameras flashed outside the gates. Sophie started crying again. The peace they'd built began to crumble under the noise. Maya tried to stay calm. She played music in the nursery, sang softly, kept routines steady. But Sophie could feel the tension. Children always do. That night, Richard called Maya into his office. He looked tired, older than before. He said, "The media won't stop. They're digging into your past. Some of them are suggesting you came here for money." Maya stared at him, shocked. "You don't believe that, do you?" "Of course not," he said quickly. But his tone carried hesitation, a trace of the same fear that had built his walls years ago. She took a breath. "Mr. Grant, I came here because I needed work, but I stayed because Sophie needed someone to stay. That's all." He nodded, silent. But doubt, once planted, grows faster than trust. Over the next few days, everything felt different. Richard became distant again, distracted by lawyers and phone calls. Maya kept doing her job, but she felt the air in the house changing, heavy again, cold again. One morning, as she helped Sophie draw by the window, a reporter shouted from the street, "Maya, is it true you plan to write a book about her?" Sophie flinched and dropped her crayons. Maya ran outside, furious. "Leave us alone." But the cameras kept flashing. That night, Richard called her again. His voice was calm, but his words were sharp. "I think it's best if we take a break, until things settle." Maya froze. "A break? From Sophie? She's overwhelmed. The attention isn't good for her. The board is worried about the company's image." "Your board?" she interrupted. "This is about your company." He hesitated. "It's about protecting my daughter." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes filled, not with anger, but with something deeper, disappointment. "You think money protects her, but it's the one thing that's been hurting her all along." He didn't respond. He couldn't. She nodded quietly. "Okay, I'll leave in the morning." He tried to explain, to say it wasn't permanent, that it was just until things calmed down, but she had already turned away. Sometimes silence is louder than goodbye. That night, Maya sang one last lullaby. Sophie fell asleep holding her hand. Maya whispered, "You're stronger than the world thinks, little one. Don't forget that." In the morning, the sun rose over an empty guest room. Her uniform folded neatly on the bed. Her notebook gone. No note, no message. When Richard went to wake Sophie, she was sitting up in bed, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Where's Maya?" He froze. "She'll be back soon." But Sophie shook her head. "You made her leave." He tried to comfort her, but she turned away. And that night, the crying came back. The sleeplessness, the silence that used to haunt the walls returned, heavier than before. Downstairs, Richard sat alone in his office. The house felt bigger than ever. He looked at the photo of his late wife on the desk and whispered, "I did it again, didn't I?" No one answered. Only the sound of a child's distant sobs filled the halls, the same sound that had started it all. And for the first time in years, Richard Grant, the billionaire who could buy anything, realized he might have lost the only thing that truly mattered. Because the next morning, Maya was gone. Days turned into weeks. The reporters moved on. The mansion went quiet again, but not the peaceful kind. The air felt heavy, like grief had returned to stay. Sophie barely spoke. She wouldn't eat with the staff, wouldn't go outside. She just sat by the window with that old stuffed rabbit, whispering Maya's name. Richard tried to make things right. He brought in new therapists, toys, even built a small indoor garden to remind her of the one Maya made. But Sophie didn't look at any of it. She just said one sentence again and again. "She's not coming back, is she?" He didn't have an answer. One night, Richard found himself walking through the empty halls again, the same halls that once echoed with laughter. He passed Maya's room. Something stopped him. He pushed open the door. The room was spotless, except for one small thing, a notebook on the desk. He opened it, pages filled with handwriting, little drawings, lullabies, stories she wrote for Sophie. At the back, one line was written in softer ink. "When you can't sleep, find the sound of kindness. It's always somewhere near, waiting for you to listen." For the first time, Richard understood. It was never about the song. It was about presence, the kind that doesn't need money or title. The next morning, he packed a small bag and got into his car. No driver, no assistant. He drove himself across the city, to the small hospital where Maya's mother was being treated. He found Maya in the hallway, sitting by the vending machine, half asleep, uniform from her new cleaning job still on. When she saw him, she froze. "Mr. Grant." He didn't speak right away. He looked tired, older, stripped of everything except honesty. "I came to say I was wrong," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting my daughter, but I was protecting myself from being hurt again." She looked down. "You don't owe me an apology." "I do," he said, "because you didn't just help Sophie sleep. You reminded me what love sounds like when it's real." She blinked back tears. "Richard," she said softly, dropping the mister for the first time, "you didn't fail her. You just forgot how to stay." He nodded slowly. "Will you come back?" "Not as an employee. As family." She hesitated, glancing toward the hospital room. "My mother's not well. I can't leave her," he said. "Then we'll bring her home." She looked at him, unsure if he meant it, but his eyes said everything. For the first time they were honest, not the eyes of a CEO, but of a father, and a man trying to make things right. When they returned to the mansion, the staff was shocked. Sophie was in the garden, curled under a blanket. Maya walked quietly across the grass and whispered, "Hey, little one." Sophie turned, for a moment, disbelief, then a small, broken cry. She ran into Maya's arms and held on like she'd never let go again. Richard stood a few steps behind, his eyes wet. He didn't interrupt. He just let them be, the two souls who had saved him in ways he never expected. That night, Maya sang again, the same lullaby, soft, real, filled with everything that couldn't be spoken. Sophie slept peacefully, her small hand resting in Maya's. Richard stood by the doorway, whispering, "You didn't save me. You just reminded me I still mattered." Maya smiled faintly without turning round. That's what love does. It reminds us we're still here. And in that quiet moment, the house for the first time in years didn't feel lonely. It felt alive. It felt like home. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with quiet, the kind that finally feels safe. In that big house on the hill, laughter slowly returned, not loud or perfect, just real. Sophie learned to sleep again, but more than that, she learned to trust. Richard still worked hard, but now he made time to sit by her bed, to listen to her dreams, to just be there. And Maya, she became part of their family, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. People still asked about the miracle, but if you asked Maya, she'd just smile and say, there was no miracle, just love, finally being heard. Because sometimes the people who have nothing teach those who have everything what truly matters. And sometimes the lullaby isn't for the child at all. It's for the adults who forgot how to rest, how to forgive, how to simply hold someone and mean it. That's what healed the Grand Mansion. Not wealth, not power, not perfection, but a poor girl's voice, carrying a song that said, "You're not alone anymore."